and a very warm welcome to the podcast, Ken Kunken. How today, Ken?
Hi.
Wonderful. So let's get this started like all the podcast guests. Where are you right now on planet Earth?
Okay. I'm on Long Island in the state of New York, in, of course, the United States.
And in terms of Long Island, what would you say is the most, if you were to give it a kind of a review of anybody wanting to visit, what's the most positive, exciting thing about Long Island?
Well, I'm about 5 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, so being by the water is just a wonderful part of Long Island, and about 35 minutes from New York City, whether it's by train or car, if there's no traffic. So it's a very nice location because it's convenient to the city, to the beaches, and to out east on Long Island, where there's some beautiful areas to just relax in.
Cool. And in terms of temperature wise, are things heating up in Long Island? Is the spring approaching?
Actually, it is. And today it's a very nice day. It's in the 50s Fahrenheit, which is very comfortable this time of year.
Cool. 'Cause in Ireland, we're how do you say we're struggling. We're a bit confused with the weather. One minute it's cold, the next minute it's kind of warm, windy and rainy. But yeah, we're doing our best. So I gave a little bit of your background to the listeners before we start again. So can you tell listeners a little bit more about yourself?
Okay. I'm currently 74 years old, but when I was 20 in 1970, I was playing in an American football game while at college, at my college, Cornell University. And when I was making a tackle on a kickoff play, I broke my neck and severely damaged my spinal cord. As a result, I'm a quadriplegic. I'm almost totally paralyzed over most of my body. I have a little bit of movement in my left arm, but nothing in my fingers or my wrist. And on the right side of my body, I could just basically shrug my shoulder a bit. So I basically need help doing everything with respect to my activities of daily living.
And in terms of the accident, would you call it an accident or would you call it a mishap? What would you call it?
I would call it both an accident, a mishap, what have you, but it's something that should not have happened. But, it's rare. I mean, American football, there are a lot of injuries, but it's very rare that there be a spinal cord injury such as mine. So I would call it an accident.
Right. And what is, can you explain in the most kind of, as if we're talking to the idiot here, the Irish idiot, excuse, don't cancel me anybody, but what is a paraplegic? What is that?
Okay. Well, a paraplegic is the broad name that covers both paraplegia and quadriplegia. And paraplegia usually refers to somebody who's paralyzed, say, from the chest down and cannot move their legs. I'm a quadriplegic, although I think in Europe they may refer to it as a tetraplegic, where I'm paralyzed in all four limbs. So I not only can't move my legs, I have very limited movement in my left arm and none in my right. So if I know many people remember and heard about Christopher Reeve, who later played Superman many, many years ago, when he was injured, he became a quadriplegic. He couldn't move his arms or his legs. And in addition, he had trouble breathing. He needed to be on, a ventilator to breathe. Now, fortunately, I can breathe without assistance, but similar to Christopher Reeve, I'm not able to move my arms or my legs.
When the mishap, we'll say, happened, what what happened in terms of were you knocked out unconscious? Do you remember any of it?
I remember it very well. I was never knocked out unconscious. I remember that when I tackled the ball carrier, I felt like a stinging numbness throughout my body, and I suddenly lost all sensation below my shoulders. So not only can I move, I no longer have any sensation below now, maybe about 3 inches below my shoulders. So when I was lifted on a stretcher off the field to the sideline, waiting for an ambulance to come, it felt as if the people were just lifting my head up off the field. and left my body behind because all I could feel at that time was my neck and my head. So, it extended it once again, not just to all my movement, but to my sensation as well throughout my body.
And I mean, the gentleman who tackled you, um,
I
for
actually tackled him.
you tackled him.
I tackled him. Right. So,
I mean, what was his reaction?
I met him many years later. In fact, it was almost 8 years later that I met him. And he was devastated by my injury. I mean, it certainly wasn't his fault. I tackled him. He didn't do anything wrong or out of the ordinary. But he said he would always feel somewhat guilty about his unintentional involvement in my injury. But he was a very nice, compassionate individual. And it was a pleasure to finally meet him. I might add that the play that I got hurt on, I originally wasn't supposed to be in on that play.
Wow.
But on the first play of the game, one of our players was injured. And as a result, I took his place on the kickoff squad. And I later spoke to him, and he was also devastated and severely affected by my injury. He felt guilty that it was me that got hurt, not him, which of course he never should have felt guilty about. He certainly didn't do anything wrong. So I know a lot of people were affected by my injury.
Course. I mean, did you even feel a certain amount of bitterness towards the sport specifically? Not the individuals themselves, but the sport. I mean, did you feel like, oh, well, maybe if I had a bit of padding or more padding, or I was protected from a certain area, that this wouldn't have happened? Did you ever go through that stage of kind of anger?
Not that stage. No, I actually never did. I had wonderful equipment on. It's just that, your neck is not, built in such a way that you could take an impact, such as I had when my head hit the ball carrier. You basically take all the impact in your neck. It's something that, players need to be very careful about not using their head when they're making contact, with the opposing player. But, I never lost my love of the game, football. And when I was finally able to get a television in my room while I was in the hospital, the first thing that I watched was an American football game. In addition, when you're playing football for college or professionals, all those games are filmed and on tape. And I actually watched the tape of myself getting injured a number of times because I wanted to make sure I knew exactly what happened, what went wrong, and how it could have been prevented.
Right.
And, I might add, sports needs to do everything they can do to make it safe for the athletes. Um, but I never lost my love for the game.
When did this love first start, Ken? Let's romanticize. I mean, was it from being a small boy, or did you have any other family members that were, big football fans? Or sorry, for anybody that's in Europe, American football fans, just in case, or NFL or college football.
Almost as soon as I was born. My father played football while he was in college. My brother Steve, who's 2 years older than me, was an avid athlete, played football. So I began playing in Little League football at the age of 8. So I played 6 years of Little League football, 2 years of football when I was in the junior high school, 2 years of football when I was in high school, and this was my second year playing football while in college.
And when this happened to you, what was the reaction from the family? I mean, how did they manage this?
Everybody was devastated. Everybody was devastated. While you hear about different types of injuries playing sports, it's very rare that you hear about a spinal cord injury. And very little seemed to be known by the public about spinal cord injuries back then. I mean, unfortunately, when Christopher Reeve received his injury, it became a lot more well known, the ramifications of a spinal cord injury. But when I was hurt, very few people knew a lot about spinal cord injuries. In fact, when a doctor originally examined me while I was in the hospital, he told my family that I probably wasn't going to survive the week.
Wow.
and that if I was to survive, my life expectancy would be between only 5 to 9 years. I mean, there was very little that seemed to be known about my type of injury back then. So, in fact, they really didn't even tell me I had a spinal cord injury. They originally told me that I broke my neck, which I did. And I had thought for a long period of time, once my neck heals, I'd be back up on my feet. And of course, that's not the case with a spinal cord injury.
Did I mean did a doctors because I remember watching the Christopher Reeve documentary, the one that was out recently. I think his son had made it. The son and daughter had made it, where the doctor had mentioned, I think it was either side of either, walking away from being kind of jolted from the horse or being the other side in terms of having the injury or death. Did you find out that through the years of how close you were from kind of just walking, just stepping up from the tackle and kind of getting on with the game?
Oh, very much so.
Right.
In fact, if I was hurt just slightly higher up in my neck, I would have lost my ability to breathe on my own. And I would have been on a respirator if they got that to me in time, just like Christopher Reeve. If I was hurt a little lower down, I'd probably have the use of my arms. So, the slightest bit going up or down in your neck or in your back makes an enormous difference. Once again, when I was injured, they really wasn't sure the extent at that point, and they really questioned whether I was going to survive at all. In fact, the doctor actually told my family, he actually said to my family, if he were my son, I would just let him go
Wow.
because he felt living in my condition was going to be just too difficult for all of us to handle.
Well, you've proved them wrong anyway, Ken. That's the main thing. You
I
proved them
hope
wrong.
so. Right. Now I'm here 54 years later and still going strong.
There you go. And you're talking to me. Who'd have thought that 54 years ago? You were talking to an Irishman on a podcast. Who knows?
Right.
Um, can I ask, I mean, in terms of before we go into more detail about your career and university and so on, um, did you take inspiration from Christopher Reeve?
Well, Christopher Reeve wasn't injured for at least 25 years after I got hurt. So, you know, nobody knew about Christopher Reeve at the time I was injured. But coincidentally, Christopher Reeve was actually a freshman at the college I was going to, Cornell, at the time of my injury. But nobody ever heard of him back then in 1970. But after Christopher Reeve's injury, 25 years later, I found his battle and what he did with his life to be very inspiring. He not only helped me, he helped a lot of people along the way with his battle against spinal cord injury and his attitude and all he did with his life.
So who would be your main then, and say pre Christopher Reeve? Who would be your main the people that inspired you? What
You
got
know,
you through this?
what actually happened is before my injury, I didn't know of any other role models that I could look to for encouragement or inspiration. People may have been out there, battling with spinal cord injuries, but I hadn't heard about them or knew anything about them. So I received a lot of encouragement, support from my family. They were with me every step of the way, very encouraging, and they basically assured me they would act as my arms and legs if need be to make sure I could still do everything I wanted to do in life. And it was through their encouragement and support that, I went back to school, earned a few degrees, and had to gain the self-confidence to go out and get a job and work.
That's some family.
Really is. I've been very fortunate.
No, that really is some family. Generally, from the recovery itself, um, what was going through your mind? In case anybody's out there listening to this podcast and they've had a similar event recently or they're going through something similar, um, what was your mindset? I know you mentioned
I-
you had support. You had support, but what
Oh,
was your
well,
mindset?
I was devastated and terribly depressed. I spent 9 months and 20 days in various hospitals and rehabilitation centers. And it was, in addition to being painful, having a broken neck and going through what I was going through, it was so incredibly uncomfortable. I mean, I couldn't do anything for myself. I couldn't scratch an itch or wipe my nose or roll over in bed or do so many common everyday activities that most people take for granted. And based on what the medical professionals were telling me, it looked like that would never change. And it was devastating to think about that. Here I was, an athlete, and now I'm thinking not only will I never play sports again, I'll never be able to do anything for myself again. How was I going to get through not just a life like that or a year like that, but each day like that? I would spend hours just staring at the ceiling, feeling like I was going to lose my mind with what had happened to me.
And the college, what was the reaction of the college in terms of, or do I say college or university?
Well, you could say either one. It's both.
Just
Right.
in case
So
people
Cornell
get upset, they
University.
do.
Yeah. You know
So,
that
how are they?
Cornell was very supportive. They tried to help me, and I had a vocational counselor at the Rehab Institute that encouraged me when I got out of the hospital to go back to school. So I decided where I really wanted to go back was to Cornell, the school I was attending when I was injured. And they were very supportive about me coming back, but they were not very wheelchair friendly. I
Right.
mean, Cornell campus is on a very hilly terrain, and virtually every one of its buildings had steps in front of them. And back then, 1970, 71, there was not one ramp or curb cut on the entire campus. So just to tell you what it was like for me, on my first day back in school, I had to be either pulled up or bounced down close to 100 steps just to attend my first day. And the dorm that I was living in had 10 steps just to get in. So every time just going in and out of my dorm, I usually had to be taken up and down 10 steps.
And was the college proactive and kind of listening to these concerns, or did it take a bit of pushing?
It was a little of both. I believe they really wanted to help me, but didn't know what they needed to do in order to do that. They were not used to having someone in my condition on their campus. I might add that I had asked them if they could at least put in a ramp to my dorm so I wouldn't have to go up and down those 10 steps every day. And their initial response was, if we were to put in a ramp at the dorm, we would have to remove two bushes, and students might protest if we removed the bushes. So
Right.
that was the attitude back then. And it took a few months before what actually happened was we had a fire drill. And in a fire drill, of course, everyone must evacuate the building. And when an administrator approached me the next day and asked how I managed during the drill, I said, well, I was able to get out of the building by having my attendant bounce me down the 10 steps. I felt bad because I know I slowed up the other students exiting. And that was the impetus for them to put in the ramp because they clearly did it not for my convenience, but for the other students' safety. And
Right.
that was fine with me. At least now we all had a ramp to use. And as it turned out, more people started to use the ramp than going up and down the steps. Nobody wanted to go up and down the steps. But in Cornell's defense, students were protesting about basically everything those days. This was during the Vietnam War. There were a lot of protests going on campus, and I understood their concerns.
So can I ask you, Ken, with a bit of humor, with the ramp, they haven't named a ramp in your name for honor, have
No,
they?
no, so far they haven't named it. And they even put in later at Cornell and even in New York City some curb cuts. And this was before there was mandated by law. Now they must do it. But I was always curious if somebody would write my name in the cement before it dried the Ken Kunken curb cut. But it never actually happened.
Well, I think Cornell University, you have an opportunity now at the moment to rename that ramp or a curb the Ken Kunken curb.
Right.
Ramp. That would be really, really cool. If anybody's listening to this from the university, please, I'll say please, not begging, but I think it'd be a lovely, lovely gesture. Um, so let's move on then to, okay, you've come kind of the realization of what's happened. and you're back in the university or the college, Cornell. And w- what did you decide then? What was there any moment you kind of said, "Oh, I just have to get on with this now"? Did you have any like a light bulb moment, kind of, "Oh, this is the way it is"?
Very much, again, I had the encouragement of my vocational rehabilitation counselor while I was in the rehab center. And basically, the thoughts were, since I'm so severely limited physically, I needed to make the most of my mental abilities. I knew that I needed to go back to school and get the best education possible. So I went back to Cornell, where I'd been studying industrial engineering at the time of my injury. And I completed my studies in engineering, but it really didn't seem like a viable field for me. I mean, this was well before they had laptop computers. So doing anything back then in the engineering field was really difficult. But I was fortunate that I had taken an elective in psychology. And my psychology professor, a man by the name of Dr. James Moss, took an interest in me and thought that I could do well in a career in counseling, working as a counselor. So he encouraged me to pursue that. And after I graduated from Cornell, I stayed at Cornell where I earned a master's degree in counseling. And then to increase my counseling credentials, I went to Columbia University, which happened to be the school I was injured against in the game, and got a second master's degree in counseling. And I decided to look for a job as a vocational rehabilitation counselor. And to my dismay, no one would hire me. Here, I had two master's degrees, and in the mid 70s, everyone felt that I was just too disabled to work. And after looking for a year, I finally found one organization willing to give me the opportunity to show what I could do. And that organization is on Long Island. It's called Abilities, Inc., which was part of what was then called the Human Resources Center. It's now called the Viscardi Center after its founder, Dr. Henry Viscardi Jr. And there I worked as a rehab counselor, providing vocational and placement counseling to other individuals who had severe disabilities. And I loved that work. And it did wonders for my self esteem and my feelings of self worth and self confidence. And I was very fortunate to have that opportunity.
No, that's brilliant, Ken. And how do I put this, Ken? Okay, so you're finding it difficult to get a job or anybody, how did that make you feel? I know it's probably a very simplistic question, you idiot asking this question, but did it make you kind of feel a little bit more down, or did you kind of go, I'm going to show these guys?
It was terribly devastating and depressing. Here I had worked so hard to go back to school, to not only graduate despite all the problems, both physically with, all the steps I had to do, but it was so difficult to even get through my studies. I had difficulty just turning the pages of a book. And again, this was well before laptop computers, well before you could go on the internet to get answers when there are certain questions that arise, doing your studies, on the computer. And here I was, dealing with that. I worked so hard to not only graduate, but to get two graduate degrees, and then still nobody would hire me. I used to ask myself all the time, what more do I have to do just to be given the opportunity to have a job? And it was devastating. And I'm so grateful for the opportunity the Viscardi Center gave me. And I might add that now, many years after I left, I was actually asked to be a member of their board of directors. And I'm so proud to continue to be involved with that organization and to try and help other people with disabilities secure employment.
Why do you think, Ken, looking back, why do you think you had that resistance, or nobody would? Do you think it's just, are we ignorant? And you can be as blunt as you want, really. I mean, say
What
him.
happened is back then, you didn't see many people with disabilities out in public, particularly someone with my disability. And one of the reasons was most facilities were not wheelchair accessible. So it was very difficult for anybody to go out. Certainly, you couldn't use an electric wheelchair because all the buildings had steps. Most streets didn't have curb cuts, so you had difficulty just being able to cross the street to go from one side to the other. And I think as a result, people did not come into as much contact as they do now with someone with a disability. And, a lot of people are just afraid of the unknown. They see somebody with a disability and they question, what that must be like. And, what could I say or do with somebody with a disability? They wouldn't know how to react, how to deal with somebody. And then they would assume, well, if you have a physical disability, that must mean you can't do anything, meaning you can't work either, even if you have your mind intact. They felt, once you have a disability, that you are totally disabled. And it was very difficult to show people otherwise.
Do you think like organizations can do more to put some sort of system in which is kind of compulsory that for every, even governments, for example, that for every new employee that joins a company, they're educated on this, or or is it's part of the school curriculum?
I think that would be great. And for a while, there were programs in affirmative action. But now the current programs that they have, seem to have a negative connotation in America. They refer to it as diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI. And suddenly, for some reason, that seems to become a bad name for businesses and companies to use that to get a more diverse workforce. And they help people to encourage people that are either minorities or somebody with a disability. And I'm so dismayed that here in America now, there's a push to do away with DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion. I think that's a huge mistake. And I might add, I left my job as a rehab counselor to later go to law school. And then I worked for more than 40 years as an assistant district attorney in Long Island, a prosecutor. And when we leave our job at the district attorney's office, we go through what's called an exit interview, where you tell the person in personnel what you like best about your job and what you thought could be improved. And I'm proud to say that on many occasions, I was told people said one of the best parts of their job was meeting, working with, and getting to know me. And I know they weren't referring to meeting and getting to know Ken Kunken. What they were referring to is meeting, working with, and getting to know someone with a severe disability. Because unless they had a close relative with a disability, most people rarely came in contact on a daily basis with somebody with a disability. And here I had people in my office saying it made them a better person and it helped them perform their job better. And it helped to motivate them and inspire them that they were working alongside somebody who had a disability and was still at work every day and working hard. And I might add, just to further that point, that after I left the job, the district attorney actually established an annual award called the Kenneth J. Kunken Award that they now give out to the outstanding assistant district attorney each and every year that best exemplifies that that individual has the work ethic of someone with a significant disability. I'm so proud of the fact that they started that.
No, I can sense it looking at you through the camera and hearing you through your voice. I kind of have that chill factor. You are an inspiration. I mean, I I would have no idea of what your life was like. I'd have no idea whatsoever. And I think a lot of us, I think we spoke with there briefly. We weren't recording that, people's perception of how hard done they are in life can be very different. You think you're having it bad, and then you look to your right and you go, oh, actually, they have it worse. And you look to your left and go, actually, they're worse again. You kind of like just progress through life and kind of just accept and keep motoring on. So Ken, I mean, you mentioned there, like, some of your colleagues thought it was great kind of getting to know you. Um, I mean, what are some of the stereotypes that you've kind of encountered over the years? And what would be annoying things that you have encountered that the average Joe would kind of do in front of you? Is there anything patronizing that's happened to you over the years? You're kind of like, hey, look, I'm okay. I can deal with this.
Oh, it happens all the time, and it still happens. I mean, I could go to a restaurant and a waitress would come up to the table and turn to the person next to me and ask what I would like to order, what I would like to eat.
Okay.
And what I found even worse was when I was still in the rehab center, where people that I thought would be used to dealing with somebody with a disability, a doctor would come into the room, turn to the personal care attendant next to me, and ask that person how I was feeling. I mean, these are people that should have known better. Those things still happen at times. People assume because you have a disability that you're totally disabled and that you can no longer think for yourself or tell people what you want or what you are doing. And they feel that you must be intellectually limited as well as physically limited. And it still takes a while to convince people otherwise. And I think the more people are exposed to people with disabilities, the more they'll feel not only more comfortable, but look at them as somebody that can work, and make a significant contribution to society. And I might add that in addition to my education and my work life, I have a very rewarding family life and personal life as well. And I thought I may want to share that with your listeners. Here I am, I'm married. Now, I've been married for more than 21 years now. And when I first married my wonderful wife, Anna, she said that she'd like to have my baby. And not just any baby, my baby. Now, at this time, I had been paralyzed for more than 30 years, and I was already in my 50s. But we researched various options, including in vitro fertilization, and we're excited to see even someone in my condition could perhaps father a child. So we pursued it, and lo and behold, as luck and fate would have it, Anna became pregnant, and on January 24th, 2005, I was present in the delivery room. Right? I was present in the delivery room when my wife Anna gave birth to triplets. We
OMG.
we have three incredible sons, Joseph, James, and Timothy. They're now sophomores in college in three separate colleges in upstate New York. And I am just so proud to be their father and how well they're doing, and proud to be my wife's husband. And we have a wonderful family life as well.
No, it's beautiful. No, it really is. I don't know how you slept because I mean I have twins and I have a boy as well. But yeah, I mean two was a tough one for snoozing. How did you get on with the three?
Boy, it was a challenge. Fortunately, my wife is a superwoman, and she handled it incredibly. In fact, there were times when the boys were little, when we didn't have any help, and my wife would have us all sitting around the table, and to feed us, she'd give one bite to Joey, then one bite to Jimmy, one bite to Timmy, give one bite to Daddy, and she'd take a bite and go around the circle again. And that's how we got through meals when we were alone.
So relationship wise, so you mentioned there, you met Anna and 21 years ago in terms of the boys. Um I mean before then, did you ever think or any did you have previous relationships? The reason I ask this is because
Yeah,
just in case, like the frustration of you might see the woman or the man of your dreams, and because you're feeling a certain way, um, how did you overcome that? Because that must have been difficult for you as well.
it was very difficult. And, like every young man, I had dreams of meeting and having a satisfying relationship with the perfect woman. But as you might imagine, dating when you're a quadriplegic and trying to impress a woman when you're almost totally paralyzed poses its own unique challenges. So it took me a while to find the perfect woman for me. I did some dating while I was in college after my injury, and also when I was later working. But my feeling was always that it was never going to result in a permanent relationship. I did not think that I would ever get married or want to get married. At the time, I did not feel it would be fair to the woman to be married to somebody with the limitations that I had. And one of my aunts convinced me that I shouldn't feel that way, that it's really a decision for the woman to make, after knowing everything about me. And after I got to meet my wife, who the woman that later became my wife, Anna, as our relationship progressed, it was actually Anna that proposed to me.
Oh
I
wow.
was still hesitant to pop the question, and it was she that actually proposed to me.
And I mean, do do you remember? Obviously, you probably do, but I hope you do because Anna's there. But I mean, do you remember the time you actually thought, "Oh, this is the one"?
You know, it was gradual because what happened was Anna actually had answered an ad that I had put in the paper that I needed help on weekends for a personal care attendant. And, I had females do the job as well as males in the past, but they needed to be, big and strong enough and able to lift me into the wheelchair. And Anna responded, and it was just wonderful having her around. She took better care of me than virtually any attendant I had ever had. And we used to spend a lot of time talking. And the more time we spent talking, the more I became convinced this is someone I wanted to spend a lot of time with. She was just such a unique, wonderful person. And it just made me feel so good. And she's absolutely beautiful as well. So that helped.
Oh, you can see
And
that big smile on your face once you
yeah,
mention her name.
and I was just so fortunate that Anna felt the same way. And we have a wonderful marriage. And she's an incredible mother and an incredible wife. And we have three incredible sons.
And the boys, I mean, what did they think of your story? I mean, what do they think of Dad's story and then meeting Mummy and stuff like that? Do they think it's fascinating or is this like whatever?
They're so used to it
Yeah.
that they don't look at it as anything special. Just so everybody knows, my wife Anna is from Poland. She is Catholic, and I am Jewish.
Dzień dobry, Anna. Dzień dobry.
Right, Zimbabwe. It's very good. Um, she's over 6 feet tall. I'm just under 5'8". I mean, we are different in so many ways, and the boys are so used to it, they don't even think twice about it. And just to give you an example, when my son Joseph was applying to college, he had to write an essay, about something significant in his life. And he wrote about what a typical family dinner was like in December. And he wrote about how, when he came to the dinner table, um, his mother would be serving a traditional Polish meal, right, of kielbasa, right, and pierogies. And before we started, we would light the Hanukkah candles. And I would lead them in a blessing in Hebrew. Um, and when it was his turn to light the candles, his mother would say to him in Polish to be careful in lighting the candles, and then we'd eat the traditional Polish meal. And there'd be a Christmas tree in the other room with its lights twinkling. And he said, and it just seems so natural.
Right.
It didn't even seem like anything unusual for him. So, the fact that he's got a father that's almost totally paralyzed, he helps me in a lot of different ways and doesn't think twice about it. And he used to go out even as a small child and come back and say, Dad, I checked, they have a ramp, you could go there, without me even telling him to check or to ask him that. They would notice these things and just naturally help me. And they're very comfortable around other individuals with disabilities. And it's just wonderful to see because they help not only each other every day, they're a team. They know it's important for them to help out because, mommy's spending a lot of time with daddy helping. They're used to that. And they're used to doing things on their own, helping each other and helping others as well.
No, you have a beautiful family, Ken. You really do.
Thank you.
Okay, Ken, bit of name dropping here. So you testified before the United States Senate Subcommittee on Healthcare, and that was chaired by Senator Ed. Can I say Edward or Ed Kennedy?
Edward Kennedy,
What was
correct.
that? So t tell us all about that. This is interesting.
Well, it happened while I was still a patient in the rehab center. I had been injured just 6 months at the time, and the expenses were certainly mounting up. It's very expensive to have an injury such as mine and deal with all the medical expenses. And my father at the time sold insurance, but here you had an insurance agent who did everything he could to have me covered as well as he could before my injury. And even he, as an experienced insurance agent, said there really was no insurance coverage out there that would be enough to cover an injury such as mine. And at the time, Senator Kennedy was conducting hearings around the country concerning health care and insurance coverage and better coverage for devastating injuries such as mine. And it seemed like a natural for the senator to have my father testify about the problems, even with the insurance industry, of covering my injury, and that a change needed to be made in the healthcare industry. And they asked me to testify to put a human face on it, while my father testified as well. And I might add that our testimony received national publicity because Senator Kennedy felt this was some of the most important testimony he heard in going around the country speaking to people. Because once again, you had somebody from the insurance industry testifying that coverage would not be enough to handle an injury such as mine. And here you had myself being in, the physical condition that I was now in, knowing that I'd be facing enormous expenses for the rest of my life, that something needed to be done.
Do you ever think, Ken, that, you know, we've kind of lost the plot in the world and society, that it's just materialistic money, what can we can buy, and we kind of lost that bit of, or do we ever have that? I don't know. I mean, I don't know whether we ever had that kind of loving, caring side of us at all.
Unfortunately, a lot of people have never had it.
Right.
Fortunately, there's always been some who have, but money seemed to be a deciding issue for many things in life. And unless you're the person that is facing these issues and these problems, a lot of times they're not that important to you, that just the other person, is in that condition. A lot of people feel as long as they can survive on their own, why should they have to worry about others? And I think, again, the more people are exposed to it, the more they find that it's not just their health, but their family members' health, or their next door neighbors, or their best friends. Everybody eventually gets confronted with health care issues. And it helps everybody in the long run, to have programs involved that would help everybody in the long run deal with these issues. So I was fortunate that Senator Kennedy took interest in this. And in fact, 8 days after my testimony, he sent me a glass paperweight in the mail that had an inscription on it that the senator said his late brother Robert Kennedy liked very much. And the words on that inscription have always been just so meaningful to me. The inscription read, "Some men see things as they are and say why. I dream of things that never were and say why not." And that quotation has been so meaningful to me that I actually later wrote a memoir about my life, and I titled it, "I Dream of Things That Never Were, the Ken Kunken Story."
And it's right behind you there, Ken.
It's
It's right
right
on your
behind me on
shoulder.
the shelf behind me as we
A little bit
speak.
of publicity going on there. We can see a little, the
Right.
little sneaky book. So tell us a little bit more about the book, your memoir.
Okay. Well, I was fortunate as, having been in my condition. being able to go back to school, later get a job, eventually get married and have a family. And I had so many people come up to me and telling me that I've been an inspiration to them and it's motivated them to more of my life. And they encouraged me to do motivational speaking. And I did quite a bit of motivational speaking. And people encouraged me that, you could reach even a greater audience if you actually put down your life experiences in a book form. And as it turned out, I had actually started writing my book while I was still a patient in the hospital. A friend of my aunt came to the hospital one day, knew I'd been very depressed, and thought it would help me to talk about my depression and what I was going through, and felt it would be very informative to other people to tell them what it's like to have a spinal cord injury and go through rehab. And, for years, I would start to write more in my book, and then I'd stop, start again and stop. And, after my triplets were born, I looked at them and basically said, whoa, this is big. This is a story that needs to be told. And through my wife's help and encouragement, we sat down when I finally, retired and spent a lot of time working on my memoir. And I'm so glad that we now have it out. And it was for the first time when the book came out that my boys actually read the book and learned about my full story. And in addition, it's not only out in hardcover and in an ebook, a Kindle version, but we recently did an audio book where my son Timothy actually did the recording. I did the narration. He conducted, the equipment, and it's now out in an audiobook as well. And people could learn more about my story and where they could get the book by going to my website, kenkunken.com, and that will give them a lot of information about it.
So is Timothy the favorite child? Is that what we're trying to say, Ken?
My favorite is who's ever with me at the moment and within close enough distance that I could kiss them. Right? They've suddenly become my favorite. But I'm so fortunate. I have three incredible boys that are very different. And, I could not enjoy each one any more than I do. They are just absolutely great. And what I love too is that they're very close with each other. They're each other's best friends. While they go to three different colleges, they visit each other in school. They've gone to classes with each other. They do FaceTime and speak on the phone often. It's just great to see.
So if anyone, any listeners trying to get in touch with you, is it best via your website, kenkunken.com, or
Yes,
do you have LinkedIn's, Facebook, Instagrams, and all that type of stuff?
my wife has me on all of those
All
things, but
right.
I would suggest the kenkunken.com.
So one last question. What's the future hold?
Well, the future, I'm enjoying right now retirement, and I continue to do motivational speaking and, being before groups talking about my memoir and promoting what I've done with my life. I'm also, as I indicated before, I'm involved in the Viscardi Center board of directors, where I still try and help and encourage people to hire people with disabilities. I'm on the Cornell University Council. I'm on Suffolk County Rehabilitation Society Council. So I'm trying to stay involved with helping people with disabilities. But right now, in my immediate future, my brother's youngest son is getting married way out in Montana on the other side of the country. And my wife, boys, and I are going to drive to the wedding in May and see a lot more of the country while we do. And that's the next step. So we're looking forward to
Tell
that.
him don't do it, Ken. Don't do it. You have time. I'm only joking. Don't do it. Don't do it. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure chatting today, Ken. You're a total inspiration. If anybody there wants to reach out to Ken, as he mentioned, on the website kenkunken.com and other social media platforms. So thanks so much to Ken Kunken for chatting with me today on the Wellbeing and Career podcast. Thank you, Ken.
Thank you, David.